Is there further debate?
Mr. Speaker, to debate against the bill, Mr. Speaker. Well, I really appreciate the personal stories that have been shared on all sides here, and I'll share mine. I've been through 4 pregnancies. I have 4 kids, and most of the people in this room actually probably haven't been through a pregnancy, although I'm sure many of you have witnessed one close by. But I think we can all stipulate that everybody in this room loves babies. I think that nobody on either side of this equation has a monopoly on the claim to love for babies. I just want to clarify my reasons. I know this is a very difficult issue on which to persuade anybody, and I'm not optimistic on that front. But I did at least want to share my rationale for why I fervently oppose this bill. Going through pregnancy and childbirth is not a small ask. I'll talk about just my first pregnancy. My first pregnancy, my son was 12 pounds. I gained 80 pounds. I really didn't sleep. I had such awful heartburn. I ended up with esophageal scarring from it. My feet swelled so much I couldn't wear shoes. I had to basically go around in flip-flops. I had to take a month off work before I had the baby because it was so painful to move around. Finally was delivered, forceps delivery with tearing, 46 stitches, massive blood loss. I couldn't really move for weeks afterwards. My husband had to carry me around the house whenever I had to move. And I had it relatively easy, actually. I was happily married, and I had a job that gave me months of paid leave off. I wasn't a 16-year-old. I wasn't, desperately poor or homeless or facing massive social stigma. I actually had full family support. I love my kid to the moon and back. I would do anything for him, and I went on and had 3 more kids. But I have to say, this experience made me more pro-choice than I ever was before, because having been through that and the outrageous physical pain and difficulty and long-term physical difficulties. I actually, my doctor said that I got an autoimmune disease from fetal cells that crossed the placental membrane in later stages of pregnancy that has caused me cardiovascular problems for the 20 years since. So there were pretty serious long-term health consequences from this, and that's not uncommon for people to have lifelong health fallout from this. And my conclusion was that, very happy I did it. Do it again in a minute. But you better want to have to go through that. I don't think that's something the government should make you have to do against your will. I think that is several bridges too far in these United States of ours for the government to be able to force a person to go through that kind of physical ordeal against their will. I have friends and family who are organ donors, who have given bone marrow and liver and kidneys. And I have to say, they've described it, and it was an ordeal, but it was minor compared to a lot of pregnancies that I've heard about. Because essentially, pregnancy is an organ donation. You are donating the use of your internal body organs and supporting structures and body fluids for use by another. And like all organ donations, I think they should be voluntary. I think we should not be in the business of government-forced organ donations. And frankly, I think it would be inconceivable that we'd be having this debate if it were a question of the government commandeering men's body organs against their will for 9 months, no matter who the recipient is, no matter whether they're a full life. I don't think the debate is about where life begins, et cetera. I think it's a question about when the government can commandeer your body organs against your will. Unless you consider talk of this, state commandeering your body organs to be hyperbole, it really isn't. I mean, we're not talking about the millions of cases every year where women voluntarily go through their pregnancy and have babies. Where the rubber hits the road on this legislation is where the woman has decided she absolutely does not want to go through that, and the state is going to make her do it anyway. The state is going to make her go through this ordeal against her will, ostensibly forcing, the commandeering of her body organs. And I'd just like to ask, what would this conversation look like if it were men's bodily autonomy at issue? And on the radio once last year, I heard this Spanish nun.
Yeah, I object. This isn't about a man thing. This is not a sexist argument.
Mr. Chair, please take to heart the objection and continue your debate.
I note the objection, but I think it is highly relevant to look at equity questions and whether we are applying different standards to men and to women. But I wanted to relate this story that I heard on the radio from a Spanish nun, a Sister Teresa Forcades. And in 2009, she sent this hypothetical to the Vatican. She said, let's imagine you have a child, an innocent child who needs a kidney donation, and the father is the only match for that kidney donation. Without it, the child will die. He created the child. He created the child with the knowledge that he could be the only genetic match for that child and that this scenario could someday occur. Does the right to life of the child take precedence over the father's right to self-determination of his own body? Should the father be forced to give the kidney to that child? Now, in the 11 years since she sent that letter to the Vatican, she never received an answer. But I think I know what the answer would be in Idaho. I think it would be no. I think it would be no regard. You may think it's the right thing to do. I would absolutely give my kid my heart, my lungs. I'd give my kid anything that they needed. But I don't think the government should force me to do it. And I think that's what the outcome would be here, regardless of whether you think it's the right thing to do, regardless of whether every church in town thinks it's the right thing to do. I think we would not go down the path of the government telling that father he must, by law, donate his kidney to the child. Now, again, and I don't think we would call that murder. I think that would be called the father just deciding not to be an organ donor. And I don't think that would be because we devalued the baby, or the child. I think it would be because we value the man's autonomy over his own body organs and say the government has no business telling him that he's got to donate body organs against his will. I don't think there's a chairman in this building that would give me a hearing if I brought such a bill requiring that organ donation. And this really is fundamentally what we're talking about, whether the state can commandeer a woman's body organs against her will and force her into 9 months of involuntary pregnancy. It's essentially the government exercising the power of eminent domain over your innards, which I consider to be just about the most profound breach of autonomy that I can think of. I mean, our founding fathers were so concerned about making you have a soldier quartered in your living room that they put a whole amendment on it in the Bill of Rights. But here we're talking about the government forcing you to house someone in your stomach against your will. Now, I've heard people say that the woman ostensibly asked for this loss of autonomy over her body by having sex, that when she had sex, she sort of assumed the risk that the government could force her to do this and that she would have to carry the baby. But is that really loss of personal autonomy over your body organs and being forced to have them commandeered by the government? Is that a reasonable punishment for consensual sex? We wouldn't do this to criminals, folks. We wouldn't do this to murderers on death row. We wouldn't say, you've got to donate your bone marrow, you've got to donate your innards. We wouldn't make them do it to even the person that they'd injured. We don't do it to corpses. They can't even make you give your body parts after you're dead against your will unless you signed a consent while you were alive saying so. But we're ostensibly proposing to do this to live women who have committed no crime other than having sex. I've also heard the argument that in common law there's a notion of a duty to rescue, that if you create a hazard for somebody, that it's your duty to rescue them from that hazard. And I've heard that extended to this situation, that you essentially created this state of dependency of the fetus on you, and so now it's your duty to rescue them from that dependency. But that's not how the law works, at least when it's applied to men. The duty to rescue is very narrow. It's like you have to call an ambulance if you hit somebody kind of thing. It's very clear that you never have to do anything that could endanger your health or life in any way. So I don't think that philosophy really extends here, because this law has no exception for the health of the woman, completely disregards it. Government can make you give up your body organs even if it causes you dire health damage. The only way out is if you can literally prove that you would die if you went through this abortion, if you went through this pregnancy. So, I want to get to this question of life, because yes, life is an important objective. Preserving life is a very important objective of our laws. But I don't think it's actually the highest objective of our laws. If it were, our laws would look very different. If life really were the top and only thing we care about, we would have mandatory bone marrow registries. We'd have mandatory organ donations. We certainly wouldn't have the faith healing exception in our law. We would have very different laws. We would have had universal health care a long time ago if all we cared about were saving lives and that were the top thing we cared about. But I think there is something higher than that, and that is freedom and autonomy. And protecting autonomy over your own body, I think, takes the highest level in our laws, and that's consistent with how our laws look. We don't force people to do absolutely anything that would be required to save somebody else's life. We say you have freedom and the government cannot come in and force you to do things, certainly when it's related to the use of your own body organs. So if the goal is to reduce abortions, which I think is the goal of pretty much everybody in this room, I think it should be approached as it would be if it were men whose body organs were at stake, in which case I think we would approach it.
I object. I'm sorry. We keep making this a man-woman issue. There are a lot of women who support this bill. This is not a man-woman issue, and I think we need to change that.
Good lady, you're about to wrap up, correct?
I will be, yes, Mr. Speaker. But again, I think it is highly relevant that we have equal standards as applied to men and women in our society. And so I think this is highly relevant. But I think we should be looking with a carrot rather than a stick. If we want people to make this choice to contribute the use of their body organs, we should be pursuing policies to make it as feasible as possible for them to do so, rather than having the government commandeer their body organs against their will. Now, the abortion rate hit an all-time low in 2016 since it was made legal in 1973 under Roe v. Wade. It dropped by almost half to half the level it was in the 90s. And it was not because Roe v. Wade was overturned, and it was not because abortion was banned. It was because we made contraception available and free under the Affordable Care Act. It was because more states offered paid family medical leave. It was because minimum wage was increased. It was because affordable child care was offered in more places. It was because we smoothed the path for people to make that decision, and that is how we should proceed. We should not be proceeding by seizing women's body organs against their will. And so with that, I think that this bill is fundamentally inconsistent with American principles of freedom and autonomy, and I hope at least some of you will give this your red light.